Sarah Mitchell stood in her kitchen, staring at the final eviction notice with trembling hands. The morning light filtered through the windows of the farmhouse that had been her home for 8 years, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Behind her, 8-year-old Tommy sat at the kitchen table, mechanically spooning cereal into his mouth while his backpack waited by the door. "Mommy, why is there a big red sign in our yard?" Tommy asked, his voice small and uncertain. Sarah folded the notice quickly, forcing a smile as she turned to face her son. "We're going on an adventure, sweetheart. Remember how we talked about maybe living somewhere new?" Tommy's spoon clinked against his bowl. "But I don't want to leave. This is where Daddy used to read me stories." The mention of Robert sent a familiar ache through Sarah's chest. 6 months since the accident, 4 months since the divorce papers she'd never signed became irrelevant, and 2 weeks since she'd learned that Robert's debts and poor financial decisions had cost them everything. The bank had been patient, but patience had limits. "I know, baby. But sometimes we have to be brave and try new things." Sarah moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, packing their remaining belongings into 2 worn suitcases. Most of their furniture and possessions had already been sold to pay bills. "We'll make new memories." Tommy pushed his bowl away, his eyes welling up. "Mommy, where will we sleep tonight?" The question hung in the air like a weight. Sarah had called every relative, every friend, but the responses had been the same. Sympathy, but no spare room, no ability to help. Her parents had disowned her when she'd married Robert against their wishes, and pride had kept her from reaching out to them even now. "We'll figure it out," she whispered. But the words felt hollow even to her. An hour later, Sarah and Tommy sat in a corner booth at Millbrook Diner, their 2 suitcases tucked beside them like faithful dogs. The red vinyl seats were cracked with age, and the smell of bacon grease and coffee filled the air. Sarah had ordered 1 plate of pancakes and eggs, which they shared while she pretended to study the classified ads in the local paper. Waitress wanted, must have transportation and references. Sarah didn't have either. Farmhand, housing provided. She had no experience with livestock. Every job seemed to require something she couldn't provide. More coffee, hun. Helen, the weathered waitress with graying brown hair, approached with the pot. "Just water, please." Sarah managed to smile, acutely aware that every refill cost money she didn't have. Helen's eyes flicked to the suitcases, then to Tommy's quiet demeanor. Around them, the diner hummed with the conversations of people who belonged somewhere. People who would go home to warm houses and full refrigerators after their meals. "That's Sarah Mitchell," she heard someone whisper from a nearby booth. "You know, the one whose husband died in that car accident. Lost everything, I heard. House savings, everything. Shame about the boy," another voice replied. "What's she going to do now?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. She kept her eyes fixed on the newspaper, pretending she couldn't hear the speculation about her life. Tommy seemed oblivious, coloring on the back of a placemat with a crayon Helen had given him. When Helen returned with their check, Sarah opened her purse and counted out the bills and coins. Her heart sank. She was $3 short. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Would it be possible to pay the rest tomorrow? I just need already taken care of." A deep voice interrupted from behind her. Sarah turned to see a man standing near their booth. He was tall, with dark hair and kind brown eyes, wearing a simple white button-down shirt and jeans. There was something solid about him, reassuring. "I'm sorry." Sarah blinked in confusion. "The check. It's paid." He nodded toward the counter, where Helen was already processing his credit card. "Don't worry about it. I can't let you—" Sarah started to protest, but the man held up a gentle hand. "I knew Robert," he said quietly. "Good man. I'm Daniel Carter. I own the hardware store down the street." He pulled a business card from his shirt pocket and placed it on the table. "If you need anything." Before Sarah could respond, he was gone, leaving her staring at the simple white card. Carter's Hardware, Daniel Carter, owner. She looked up to see him through the window, walking down Main Street with his hands in his pockets. Who was that man, Mommy? Tommy asked, looking up from his coloring. "I'm not sure, sweetheart." But he was very kind. As they gathered their belongings to leave, Tommy suddenly swayed on his feet. Sarah caught his arm, alarmed by the heat radiating from his small body. "Tommy, are you okay?" "I don't feel good," he whispered, leaning heavily against her. Sarah pressed her hand to his forehead and felt her heart skip. He was burning up. The Millbrook Medical Clinic was a small, clean building with cheerful yellow walls and children's artwork displayed in the waiting room. Sarah filled out paperwork with shaking hands while Tommy lay listlessly across two plastic chairs, his cheeks flushed with fever. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Reynolds, a silver-haired man with gentle eyes, called them back to an examination room. After checking Tommy thoroughly, he frowned with concern. "It's a respiratory infection. He needs antibiotics and rest. Lots of fluids," the doctor scribbled on his prescription pad. "I'd like to see him again in 3 days." "Of course," Sarah said, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "What will this cost?" The receptionist, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, handed her a clipboard. "I'll need to verify your insurance information. It lapsed last week." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "I can pay, just not all at once. Could we work out a payment plan?" The receptionist's expression grew uncomfortable. "Let me check with the office manager." While they waited, Sarah watched Tommy struggle to sit up straight. His breathing was slightly labored, and his usual bright chatter had been replaced by an exhausted silence that frightened her more than anything. "Daddy," came a young voice from the hallway. "Is this going to hurt?" "Not at all, Emma. Just a quick checkup," replied a familiar voice that made Sarah's head turn. Daniel Carter appeared in the doorway of the adjacent room, his hand on the shoulder of a girl about 10 years old with auburn hair in pigtails. When he saw Sarah, surprise flickered across his features. "Sarah, is everything okay?" "Tommy's sick," she said simply, gesturing to her son, who was now half asleep against her shoulder. Daniel's daughter Emma peered around her father with curious green eyes. "Is he going to be okay?" "I hope so," Sarah replied, then looked at Daniel. "Thank you again for lunch. I'll pay you back as soon as I can. Don't worry about that." Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. He seemed about to say something else when the office manager appeared, a stern-faced woman with a tight bun. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm afraid without insurance, we'll need payment in full before you can pick up the prescription. The visit today is $200, and the medication will be another $60. Sarah felt the room spin slightly. "I understand, but I don't have that much right now. Isn't there some kind of assistance program? You'd need to apply through the county office, and that process takes several weeks." "Several weeks?" Sarah's voice cracked. "He needs the medicine now." From the corner of her eye, she saw Daniel step closer to the reception desk. "Put it on my account," he said quietly. "No." Sarah stood quickly, nearly knocking Tommy off her lap. "I can't let you do that. We barely know each other." "Your son needs medicine," Daniel said simply. "Everything else can be sorted out later." Sarah stared at him, overwhelmed by his kindness, but also humiliated by her situation. The other patients in the waiting room were watching now, and she felt exposed, like a charity case on display. "I don't need your pity," she said, her pride flaring up despite her desperation. She gathered Tommy in her arms, ignoring the receptionist's protests about the unpaid bill, and walked quickly toward the exit. "Sarah, wait," Daniel called after her, but she was already pushing through the glass doors, Tommy heavy in her arms, as she stumbled into the parking lot. The late afternoon sun was harsh, and she realized with growing panic that they had nowhere to go. No car, no home, no money, and now a sick child who needed rest and medication. She made it to a bench outside the clinic before her knees gave out. Setting Tommy down beside her, she buried her face in her hands as the weight of their situation crashed over her. Tommy was burning with fever. She had less than $20 to her name, and night was approaching fast. "Mommy?" Tommy's voice was weak. "My throat hurts." "I know, baby. I know." Sarah pulled him close, feeling tears she'd held back all day finally spill over. "I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry, Sarah." She looked up to find Daniel standing a few feet away, his expression filled with concern. Emma hung back by the clinic doors, watching with worried eyes. "Please," Daniel said softly. "Let me help. No strings attached, no questions asked. Just one parent to another." Sarah looked down at Tommy, who was shivering despite the warm evening air. Her pride had become a luxury she couldn't afford, not when her son's health was at stake. "Just for tonight," she whispered. Daniel's farmhouse sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, surrounded by cornfields that stretched to the horizon. It was smaller than Sarah's old home, but infinitely warmer, with comfortable furniture and family photos covering every surface. The pictures showed Daniel with a beautiful woman with auburn hair like Emma's, his late wife. Sarah realized Emma's room is upstairs. "And there's a guest room right next to it," Daniel explained as he led them inside. "It has its own bathroom. Emma, can you show Tommy where everything is?" Emma nodded solemnly and took Tommy's hand. "Do you like puzzles?" she asked him. "I have a really big one with horses." As the children headed upstairs, Daniel turned to Sarah. "I picked up Tommy's prescription. The doctor said he should start feeling better within 24 hours. Sarah accepted the small pharmacy bag, her throat tight with emotion. "I will pay you back, every penny. I promise. I'm not worried about that." Daniel moved around the kitchen, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. "When's the last time you two had a proper meal?" Sarah couldn't remember. The past week had been a blur of stress, selling belongings and trying to stretch every dollar. "You don't have to. I'm making dinner anyway." "Emma gets cranky if we eat too late." Daniel's tone was matter-of-fact, not pitying. "Do you cook?" Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling slightly. "I used to. When we had a kitchen. Well, you have one now, even if it's just for tonight." They worked together in comfortable silence, Daniel grilling chicken while Sarah prepared a salad and helped Emma set the table. It felt surreal, this moment of domestic normalcy after weeks of chaos. Tommy perked up slightly after taking his medicine, and Emma entertained him with stories about her school and her pet hamster. "Mr. Whiskers, Daddy," Emma said as they sat down to eat. "Mrs. Henderson from school said some people are calling Sarah a gold digger who's after your money." The words hit the table like a physical blow. Sarah's fork froze halfway to her mouth, and she felt heat flood her face. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Emma, that's not appropriate dinner conversation," he said firmly. "But what's a gold digger?" Emma pressed on with the relentless curiosity of a 10-year-old. "It's someone who tries to take advantage of people," Sarah said quietly, setting down her fork. "And Mrs. Henderson is right to be concerned about your father." "No, she's not," Daniel said, his voice sharp. "Emma, Mrs. Henderson sometimes forgets that grown-ups' conversations aren't meant for little ears. Sarah is our guest, and guests are treated with respect in this house." But the damage was done. Sarah could barely finish her meal, acutely aware that her presence was already causing problems for this kind man and his daughter. The next morning, Sarah walked Tommy to Millbrook Elementary School, a brick building with a playground that had seen better days. The morning was crisp with the promise of autumn, and other parents chatted in small groups as they dropped off their children. "Is that her?" she heard one woman whisper as they passed. "Living at Daniel Carter's house after knowing him for what, a day?" Another replied, "Poor Margaret must be rolling in her grave." Sarah kept her eyes straight ahead, her hand tight on Tommy's. She'd hoped that in a small town, people might be more understanding. But she was quickly learning that small towns could also be places where everyone's business was everyone else's entertainment. At the school office, Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with steel-grey hair and disapproving eyes, made a show of looking up Tommy's temporary enrollment paperwork. "I see his address is listed as the Carter residence," she said, her tone carefully neutral, but her meaning clear. "Will that be permanent?" "We're just staying there temporarily while I find work," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Of course." Mrs. Henderson's smile was thin. "Well, Tommy, let's get you to your classroom." As Sarah walked back through town, she felt the weight of stares and whispered conversations. By the time she reached Daniel's house, her cheeks were burning with embarrassment and her resolve was crumbling. She found an elegant older woman sitting at Daniel's kitchen table, her silver hair perfectly styled and her expression stern. Even seated, she commanded the room with an air of authority that made Sarah feel like an intruder. "You must be Sarah," the woman said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of old money and social position. "I'm Patricia Greenwood, Margaret's mother." Sarah's heart sank. Daniel's mother-in-law had come to confront the woman who was staying in her deceased daughter's home. "Mrs. Greenwood," Sarah said carefully, "I'm sorry for the intrusion. We'll be leaving today." "How convenient that you mention leaving," Mrs. Greenwood replied, her blue eyes cold as winter. "Because that's exactly what we need to discuss." Before Sarah could respond, Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway. Through the window, Sarah watched him climb out and head toward the house with his usual easy stride. She dreaded what was about to unfold. "Patricia." Daniel's voice carried surprise as he entered the kitchen. "What brings you here so early?" "I think you know exactly what brings me here, Daniel." Mrs. Greenwood stood, her posture rigid. "The entire town is talking about your houseguest." Daniel's expression hardened. "Sarah and Tommy needed help. That's what we do for people in this community. This is different, and you know it." Mrs. Greenwood's voice rose slightly. "A single woman living in your home, in Margaret's home. Have you thought about what this looks like? What people are saying about Emma?" "People will always talk," Daniel replied, but Sarah could hear the strain in his voice. "Not just talk, Daniel. I've already received calls from 3 members of the town council. They're questioning your judgment. And if your judgment is compromised..." She let the threat hang in the air. Sarah understood immediately. In a custody arrangement, especially with a widowed father, any appearance of impropriety could be devastating. "That's enough," Daniel said firmly. "Sarah is a mother in need, and helping her is the right thing to do. At what cost?" Mrs. Greenwood demanded. "Your reputation? Your business? Emma's stability? Margaret would be heartbroken to see..." "Don't!" Daniel's voice was sharp enough to cut. "Don't speak for Margaret. She would want me to help people, and you know it." Mrs. Greenwood's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained. "I loved Margaret like my own daughter, and I love Emma like my own granddaughter. I won't stand by and watch this family be destroyed by misplaced charity." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. Sarah felt like she was suffocating, trapped between Daniel's kindness and the harsh reality of what her presence was costing him. "I need some air," Sarah whispered, and fled through the back door. She found herself walking toward town, her mind racing. Everything Mrs. Greenwood had said was true. Sarah's presence was damaging Daniel's reputation, potentially putting his custody of Emma at risk, and creating problems in his community. Her gratitude for his help was quickly being overshadowed by guilt over what it was costing him. At Carter's hardware store, she hesitated outside the large windows displaying tools and gardening supplies. She needed to tell Daniel she was leaving, but she dreaded the conversation. Through the glass, she could see him talking with a customer. His manner professional and friendly, the bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the conversation between Daniel and 2 middle-aged men stopped abruptly. "I'm telling you." "Daniel, people are talking," one of the men was saying as Sarah approached. "Nothing personal against the lady, but you've got Emma to think about." "And your business." "Tom's right," the other man added. "Small towns have long memories. You sure you want to risk everything for someone you just met?" Daniel noticed Sarah approaching and his face flushed. "Gentlemen, I think we're done here." But Sarah had heard enough. As the men left, nodding politely to her with barely concealed curiosity, she turned to Daniel with tears in her eyes. "I'm making things worse for you," she said simply. "I heard what they were saying. Mrs. Greenwood was right." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah, don't listen to..." "Your mother-in-law said the town council is questioning your judgment." "What does that mean for Emma?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "It means some people have too much time on their hands and not enough real problems to worry about." But Sarah could see the worry in his eyes. She was about to respond when panic suddenly seized her. "Where's Tommy? He should be getting out of school soon." Daniel checked his watch. "Emma gets out in 20 minutes. Tommy's in the same after-school program." But when they arrived at the school, Emma emerged alone, her face creased with worry. "Daddy, Tommy left with Mrs. Henderson an hour ago. She said his mom came to pick him up early, but I didn't see anyone." Sarah's blood turned to ice. I didn't pick him up." Daniel was already pulling out his phone. "Helen, it's Daniel Carter. Is Tommy Mitchell at the diner?" A pause. "Okay, thanks." The next hour was a blur of panic and growing fear. Daniel called the police while Sarah and Emma searched the school grounds. Other parents joined the effort, including some of the same people who'd been gossiping about Sarah just that morning. Mrs. Henderson, flustered and defensive, insisted she'd seen Tommy leave with a woman. Though her description was vague, he might have gotten confused, Officer Brady, a young policeman with kind eyes, suggested. Kids sometimes wander when they're upset or scared. Any place that might be special to him? Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Tommy didn't know Millbrook well enough to have special places, unless... "The cemetery," she whispered. "Robert's buried in Millbrook Cemetery. Tommy asked about visiting his father yesterday." They found him 20 minutes later, sitting cross-legged beside a simple granite headstone, his small form almost lost among the tall grass. Sarah ran toward him, relief and terror warring in her chest. "Tommy!" "Oh, sweetheart, you scared me so much." Tommy looked up at her with tear-stained cheeks. "I wanted to tell Daddy we might have to move again. I wanted to ask him to help us stay." Sarah knelt beside him, gathering him into her arms. "Baby, you can't just leave school like that. People were so worried." "I'm sorry," Tommy sobbed. "But I'm scared, Mommy. What if we have to go away and I can't remember where Daddy is buried?" Daniel and Emma approached slowly, giving the mother and son space, but staying close enough to help. The afternoon sun slanted through the old oak trees, casting gentle shadows across the peaceful cemetery. "Tommy," Daniel said quietly, kneeling down to the boy's level. "Do you know what I do when I'm scared about forgetting my wife?" Tommy shook his head, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "I tell Emma stories about her. I show her pictures. And I remember that the people we love don't live in places like cemeteries. They live in here." Daniel tapped his chest. "Your daddy will always be with you no matter where you live." "But what if we have to go far away?" Tommy asked. "And then he'll go with you," Emma said solemnly. "That's what Daddy told me when Mommy died. She goes everywhere with me now." As they sat together in the fading light, Sarah felt something shift inside her. For weeks, she'd been so focused on her pride, on not being a burden, that she'd forgotten what truly mattered. Tommy needed stability, but he also needed to see his mother as strong, not as someone who ran away from every difficulty. "I owe you all an apology," came a voice from behind them. They turned to see Mrs. Greenwood approaching, her earlier stern demeanor replaced by something softer. She moved slowly through the grass, her elegant shoes impractical for cemetery walking. "Mrs. Greenwood?" Daniel started to stand, but she waved him down. "Please, let me speak." She looked at Sarah directly. "I watched how this community came together to search for your son today. I saw Daniel organizing the search, saw how much people respect him, how much they wanted to help. And I realized something." Sarah waited, her arms still around Tommy. "Margaret fell in love with Daniel because of his kindness, his willingness to help others, even when it cost him something. If I try to change that about him, I'll be destroying the very thing my daughter loved most." Mrs. Greenwood's voice grew soft. "She would want him to help you, and she would want me to help you too." The older woman looked at Tommy, who was peeking at her with curious eyes. "What do you say we all go get some ice cream and figure out how to make this work?" 1 month later, Sarah stood in front of her third-grade classroom at Millbrook Elementary, watching her students work quietly on their math worksheets. The job as a teacher's aide had materialized after Mrs. Henderson, guilty about the mix-up that had led to Tommy's disappearance, recommended Sarah for the position. It didn't pay much, but combined with the small apartment above Miller's Bakery that Daniel had helped her secure, it was enough. Tommy was thriving in his new school, and the friendship between him and Emma had become the foundation for something deeper between their parents. Sarah still felt the occasional whisper or curious look, but the town had largely accepted her presence, especially after her competence in the classroom became evident. The Harvest Festival was Millbrook's biggest celebration of the year, and Main Street had been transformed with pumpkins, cornstalks, and strings of warm yellow lights. Sarah found Daniel by the apple cider stand, Emma and Tommy racing around nearby with sticky fingers and bright smiles. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, handing her a steaming cup. "I was thinking about 2 months ago," Sarah replied, accepting the warmth gratefully. "I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered." Daniel followed her gaze to the children, who were now attempting to bob for apples with more enthusiasm than skill. "And now?" "Now I think maybe I needed to lose everything to find what I really needed." Sarah looked at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. "I needed to learn that accepting help isn't the same as being weak. That community isn't something you earn, it's something you choose to be part of." Around them, the festival continued with laughter and music, neighbors greeting neighbors, and the comfortable chaos of a community celebrating together. Mrs. Greenwood had brought her famous apple pie to the baking contest, and Helen from the diner was judging the pumpkin carving competition with mock seriousness. "Sarah," Daniel said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She turned to him, suddenly nervous at the serious tone in his voice. "These past few weeks, watching you build a life here, seeing how good you are with the kids at school, how Tommy and Emma have become like siblings." He paused, searching for the right words. "I haven't felt this hopeful about the future since Margaret died." Before Sarah could respond, Tommy and Emma came running over, their faces flushed with excitement and joy. "Mom! Daniel! Come see the lights. They're starting the ceremony." Tommy grabbed Sarah's hand while Emma tugged on her father's sleeve. As they walked toward the town square, where the mayor was preparing to officially open the festival, Daniel reached for Sarah's hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she interlaced their fingers, feeling the calluses from years of honest work, the strength that had helped rebuild her life, the gentleness that had welcomed her when she had nowhere else to turn. The crowd gathered around the gazebo as Mayor Peterson began his annual speech about community, gratitude, and the blessings of harvest time. Children wove between the adults, their laughter mixing with the warm conversations of people who had known each other for generations and were now getting to know the newest members of their community. Sarah looked around at the faces illuminated by the festival lights, Mrs. Henderson, who had become an unlikely ally, Officer Brady, who checked on Tommy regularly, Dr. Reynolds, who had reduced his fees without being asked, and Mrs. Greenwood, who was patiently explaining the proper technique for caramel apple consumption to a group of fascinated children. "You know what I love about small towns?" Daniel murmured in her ear. "What's that?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to understand it herself. "Everyone gets a second chance, sometimes a third or fourth one too." As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse toward various festival activities, Tommy and Emma ran ahead toward the game booths, their voices calling back for the adults to hurry up. Sarah and Daniel followed more slowly, their hands still joined, in no rush to catch up. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the warm glow of the festival lights created a golden circle around the heart of Millbrook. Sarah thought about the woman she had been 2 months ago, desperate, proud, afraid and alone. That woman felt like a stranger now. She had indeed lost everything in 14 days, but in losing everything, she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a place to belong, a man who saw strength in vulnerability, children who could be siblings, and a community that proved that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, and that choose you in return. "Ready for that second chance?" Daniel asked softly as they reached the game booths where Tommy and Emma were already debating the strategic merits of ring toss versus balloon darts. Sarah squeezed his hand and smiled, her heart full of possibilities she couldn't have imagined just weeks ago. I think I'm ready for whatever comes next, and in the warm glow of the harvest festival lights, with the sounds of community celebration all around them and the promise of tomorrow stretching ahead like an unwritten story, Sarah Mitchell finally understood that losing everything had been the first step toward finding everything that truly mattered. Thank you for listening to this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please support the channel, subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments so you don't miss the next episodes. See you in the next story.